Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. Today, we're really trying to crack something open, a societal puzzle, you might say, that's maybe been holding us back for, well, centuries. We're diving headfirst into something pretty monumental. How the scientific and economic models, the ones born out of the 19th century, might still be subtly, and maybe not so subtly, holding us hostage, preventing us, really, from stepping into this revolutionary new synthesis that's, actually available to us right now in this new millennium. So our mission today, it's ambitious, yeah. We're going to explore how these profound shifts in 20th century science, and then combine that with some really revolutionary proposals for economics and energy, how they actually converge, how they come together to offer a completely new way of understanding value, human progress, flourishing, all of it. But here's the kicker. We also need to tackle that perplexing question. Why? If we have the knowledge, if we have the means, why aren't these transformative ideas really gaining traction? Why do we seem so stuck?
It's a critical point, absolutely. And what's truly fascinating, and honestly a bit disheartening, is that we do possess so much of the knowledge, the technology's there, the capability to solve some really deep challenges. Yet, collectively as a society, we seem to be operating under these, well, let's just call them outdated frameworks. And it raises a really urgent question for all of us, doesn't it? What are the profound long-term consequences of what our sources are calling a prolonged materialistic stasis?
Yeah.
What happens if we keep going down this path?
Yeah, what does it mean for our future if we stay tethered to the past like this? Okay, so before we can really imagine, a 21st century future, one that actually lives up to our potential, we really need to get a handle on that worldview, the one that defined the 19th century.
Right.
It wasn't just factories and steam engines. It cemented a very particular way of seeing everything, scientifically, economically. It's almost like this hidden operating system still running in the background, whether we realize it or not.
Absolutely. That scientific orthodoxy of the 19th century, it was incredibly powerful, pervasive. Its foundation was this really firm belief that the universe was, well, three things essentially. Self-existent, meaning it had no beginning, no outside cause. Self-contained, like a closed box operating on its own. And self-explanatory, you could understand everything just by looking inside that box. Think of it like the grand clockwork mechanism. That was the big metaphor, right? The cosmos as this purely immanent domain. Every gear, every cog, in theory, you could map it all out. All phenomena, tiny atoms to huge galaxies, were believed to be understandable just through internal laws, internal structures. Left absolutely no room for anything external, anything transcendent. It was a complete deterministic system. Every cause, every effect supposedly mappable from within. And this view, it gave humanity this sense of intellectual control, mastery over nature, a real confidence that science would figure it all out eventually.
And what's really striking is how that purely mechanistic view, the scientific one, found such a strong echo in the economic theories popping up around the same time. I mean, if scientists are seeing the universe as this giant self-contained machine, it's maybe not so surprising that economic models like Marxism or even evolving capitalism also started seeing value as something fundamentally physical, right? It's something produced by material stuff, physical labor. It must have felt intuitively, right, then if you can't touch it, it's not real value.
Precisely. These materialist economic frameworks, they came straight out of the Industrial Revolution, out of that rapidly changing capitalism. And yeah, they understood value mostly as the result of physical production. It was about raw labor, how that labor was exploited in factories, mines, and then accumulating tangible stuff, material resources. If you couldn't touch it, weigh it, count it, physically make it, it was really hard to assign value to it in those systems. And that focus on the tangible, it profoundly shaped how societies organize themselves, how they define wealth. But these frameworks, revolutionary for their time, sure, but they came with some major shortcomings. And we're still feeling the impact today deeply. First, you've got this pervasive problem of alienation and reductionism. These theories, they tended to boil down the whole complex human experience to just economic transactions. Workers got defined solely by their physical output, how many bolts they turned, how much coal they dug, and this led to this deep sense of alienation, separation from their work, and maybe more importantly, from their own intrinsic human worth. It just ignored the creative side, the intellectual contributions, the emotional aspect. All this stuff is vital for well-being, but it didn't fit the model. Your worth was basically how many widgets you made or how much stuff you owned, not the spark in your mind.
Yeah, reducing people to just their economic function.
Exactly. And second, these frameworks were built on what our sources call the scarcity paradigm. This fundamental assumption that resources, energy, materials, everything were inherently limited. That drove intense competition. The scarcity mindset, it was under everything. Capitalism, Marxism, both saw value through that lens, created this pervasive zero-sum game for me to win, you have to lose. And it completely neglected, maybe even actively discouraged, thinking about the huge possibilities for abundance. Abundance unlocked by knowledge, by innovation, by sharing technology. This is a point our sources really hammer home. The potential for abundance was just ignored. We focused on fighting over scraps.
Instead of baking a bigger pie, maybe?
Sort of, yeah. And finally, there was this huge neglect of non-material needs. With such a relentless focus on physical stuff goods, quantifiable output, these models left very little space for things like emotional well-being, intellectual satisfaction, cultural enrichment. If it wasn't a physical commodity, if you couldn't trade it or stick it on a balance sheet, it wasn't really value in that economic sense. And this narrow focus, it's created societies that often struggle, to prioritize what really makes us flourish: mental health, creativity, community, because they don't fit neatly on a material ledger. We're still dealing with the fallout today, that struggle for purpose and fulfillment.
It really does make you stop and think. Reminds me of that line from Neil Ferguson in The Ascent of Money, where he says, financial markets are just a mirror of mankind, reflecting all our flaws and beauties. But our sources here, they seem to take that a step further. They argue, well, maybe this mirror isn't just reflecting passively. Maybe it's designed to kind of disorientate us, to stop us seeing deeper truths about value. Like the mirror only shows us what it wants us to see, keeping us trapped in those comfortable but ultimately limiting 19th century ideas. It's not a mirror for self-discovery. It's a mirror for keeping an old illusion going.
That's a powerful way to put it, a distorting mirror.
Okay, so now this is where the story takes a really fascinating disruptive turn. The 20th century, especially its science, didn't just tweak those 19th century pillars. It fundamentally undermined them, one by one. A massive shift in how we saw reality.
Absolutely. A seismic shift is the right word. Let's start with that very idea of a self-existent universe. For centuries, many scientists, philosophers, they were pretty comfortable assuming the universe was eternal, or maybe in some kind of steady state. Even giants like Einstein, he initially fudged his own equations to allow for a static universe, later called it his greatest blunder, unquote. But the 20th century saw the overwhelming evidence for and acceptance of the Big Bang Theory. This model says, no, the universe had a definite beginning, about 13.8 billion years ago, started from the singular, incredibly hot, dense point.
And the proof wasn't just theoretical, right? There was actual evidence.
Exactly. The crucial evidence that really cemented it was the accidental discovery of the cosmic microwave background radiation, the CMB, back in the mid-1960s. This faint, uniform glow across the whole sky, it's essentially the leftover heat, the afterglow from the Big Bang. Direct observational proof of that hot, dense early state. So this cosmological model, it just fundamentally debunked the idea of an eternally self-existent cosmos. It clearly implied an origin. And when you have an origin, well, that inevitably leads to really deep questions, doesn't it? What caused it? What was there before it? And that points directly towards something beyond the known universe, something transcendent to its physical existence. It blew a hole in the idea the universe could just explain itself from within.
Okay, so pillar one, self-existence, starts to crumble. What about the second one, the self-contained universe, the closed box idea?
Right. The second challenge was to that idea of a self-contained universe. The 19th century view, heavily influenced by Newton, saw this deterministic, mechanistic cosmos, causally closed. Every effect had a cause inside the system, like perfect billiard balls hitting each other, no room for anything outside the box influencing things. Then came quantum mechanics. Early 20th century, and it just blew the lid right off that box. It introduced this completely radical departure, a realm of inherent uncertainties, probabilities, and these bizarre connections called entanglements. Concepts like wave-particle duality, the fact that light and matter can act like both waves and particles at the same time, or superposition, where a quantum system exists in multiple states at once until you measure it. These directly challenge that neat, tidy, self-contained picture.
Now this next bit, you mentioned it before, it's genuinely mind-bending. The collapse of the wave function upon observation. For listeners who maybe aren't quantum physicists, can you give us the nutshell version? Why is that so disruptive to the old closed box idea? What does it imply?
It's a fantastic question because that's exactly where science bumps right up against philosophy. Okay, imagine you have a spinning coin. In our normal world, it's either heads or tails, right? Even while spinning, it's one or the other. We just don't know which yet. But in the quantum world, a particle in superposition is like that coin being both heads and tails simultaneously, until you actually look at it, until you measure it. That act of observation somehow forces it to choose a state, heads or tails. And the wave function, which described all its possibilities, it collapses into just one single definite reality. So the really profound question our sources and many physicists ask is, what causes this collapse? If the universe was purely self-contained, purely mechanistic, everything should already be determined, right? But the act of observation, which seems to imply some kind of consciousness or at least active engagement, seems to play a role in actually shaping reality at its most fundamental level. Our sources argue this suggests, now this is a leap, that for the universe to have coherence, for reality to consistently choose definite states at every single tiny Planck moment, the smallest possible slice of time and space, well, it logically implies some kind of intelligence orchestrating this ongoing collapse. It hints at an active, non-local involvement, a kind of ongoing ordering that the old 19th century materialist view couldn't even conceive of. It assumed reality was just objectively out there, independent of any observer. This suggests the universe isn't just a machine, it's dynamic, interactive. It might need something beyond itself to hold it together.
Wow, okay. So it's not just what we observe, but the very act of observing might be shaping what reality is.
Yeah, that's a fundamental shift. Okay, and then the third pillar, the self-explanatory universe. I understand this links to Gödel's work. How did math throw a wrench in the works?
Exactly. Kurt Gödel's incompleteness theorems, published back in the 1930s, they were a real knockout blow to that grand ambition. For centuries, mathematicians, maybe most famously David Hilbert, they dreamt of this perfect system, a complete, consistent set of axioms, mathematical rules from which all mathematical truths could be derived, a perfect, self-contained, self-explanatory system for math. Gödel proved it was impossible, at least for any system complex enough to include basic arithmetic. His first incompleteness theorem, basically it states that any consistent formal system, like math, if it's powerful enough, will contain true statements that you can neither prove nor disprove using only the rules within that system. Think of it like trying to write the perfect rulebook for a complex game. Gödel showed there will always be true things about the game that you can't prove just by using the rules in the book. You'd need to step outside the book, get a bigger perspective.
So you need something external to understand the internal completely.
Precisely. And his second incompleteness theorem went even further. It showed that such a system can't even prove its own consistency from within itself. You can't use the rulebook to prove the rulebook itself has no contradictions. You need that external check. So these theorems, they revealed these inherent fundamental limitations in logic itself in axiomatic systems. And our sources argue, well, if something as structured and formal as mathematics can't be fully self-explanatory, then the universe, which is infinitely more complex, way more intricate, certainly cannot be fully understood or explained just from within itself. It strongly implies there are truths, principles, maybe even a reality that lies outside our current grasp, outside our systems. It echoes that idea of a transcendent realm, just like the Big Bang and quantum mechanics did. It means there are always deeper layers, always something beyond our current framework.
Okay, so pulling this together, what does this all mean for us, for humanity? This huge departure from those purely immanent 19th century views, it definitely brought in this transcendent perspective in the 20th century. It created what our sources are calling a dialectical tension. This push and pull, right, between answers you find inside a system, the immanent stuff, and aspects that seem to exist beyond it, the transcendent. It feels like a fundamental shift in how we even frame reality, forcing us to juggle these two seemingly opposite forces.
And that raises the absolutely critical question for our time. How do we reconcile these insights? Because just focusing only on what's inside the box, strict immanence, that's incomplete. But just dwelling on transcendent mysteries alone, that doesn't give us a full picture either. The 21st century right now, we're at this crucial juncture. We have to navigate the complexities left by these scientific earthquakes. The challenge for science today is to find a new balance, a kind of grand synthesis that really integrates these different perspectives.
So what does that synthesis look like? What's the goal?
Well, the aim is to harmonize the deterministic parts of the universe. The predictable laws we know work with the probabilistic ones, those quantum uncertainties. And crucially, to integrate what we know with what we don't know, or maybe can't know from within. It means bringing together insights from everywhere, physics, biology, philosophy, maybe even psychology, really breaking down those academic silos. And we have amazing tools now, right? Large-scale data modeling. Think about trying to predict every single snowflake in a blizzard, insanely complex, an nth body problem. But with serious computing power, we can model incredibly complex things now, like global climate or galaxy formation, in ways that were just impossible before. We can get really good approximations even when exact answers are out of reach.
Using brute force computation to handle that complexity.
Exactly. And the overall goal is to move towards what our sources call a post-materialist science. Now, this isn't about throwing out physics or biology, not at all. It's about acknowledging that purely reductionist materialism has limits. It's about being open to understanding things like agency, purpose, consciousness, not just as random byproducts of chemicals, but perhaps as fundamental aspects of reality. You have philosophers like Alvin Plantinga, Thomas Nagel, arguing we should actually include teleology, the study of purpose or directionality, as something scientifically investigable. This approach allows for a richer, more holistic understanding. It sees human agency not just through a simple survival lens like the old models might, but acknowledges our unique place on the consciousness spectrum, our capacity for meaning, creativity, self-actualization.
But there's a flip side, isn't there? A warning.
There is a serious warning embedded in this. Failing to make this shift, failing to achieve this synthesis, risks what they call a prolonged materialistic stasis, a disconnect from reality. What that stark phrase means is a future where our amazing human potential for thought, creativity, meaning gets suppressed. We get reduced to just reacting to material conditions, a basic survival-driven existence, almost like, and this is their phrase, a bacterial end of the consciousness spectrum.
Wow.
Yeah. Instead of evolving towards our higher conscious potential, we just stagnate. It's a pretty stark choice presented here. Stagnation versus true flourishing.
That is a powerful and frankly, quite unsettling image.
Yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this even further then. So, just like science moved beyond 19th century materialism, our sources are pushing for an equally profound shift in economics. They call it a Copernican revolution for economics, which really challenges the bedrock of how we see value, doesn't it? Putting the human mind right at the center, like Copernicus put the sun at the center.
Exactly. And the driving force behind this proposed revolution, the central problem it addresses, is really sobering when you think about it. How is it even possible that with all our knowledge, all our incredible tech, all the resources we technically have access to, we still allow fellow human beings to go without basic dignity, without enough food, proper shelter, decent health care? Our sources look at that paradox and they directly challenge that idea of financial markets being just a neutral mirror of mankind. They say, wait a minute, maybe that mirror is actually designed to confuse us, to actively stop us from seeing where value really comes from, keeping us trapped in this state of artificial scarcity.
So not just reflecting flaws, but maybe creating or maintaining them.
That's the implication, and this leads to a really sharp critique of traditional economics. Capitalism, they argue, is by design focused only on claims of value for physical arrangements. It's obsessed with the tangible, the material product. And this built-in bias, it leads to irrational and often deeply unfair relationships between human effort and natural resources. Think about how often essential work is undervalued, or how vital resources get exploited for short-term gain. This misplaced focus ends up degrading humanity itself, reducing people to, well, the sources use strong language, mindless capitalist consumers and/or communist drones. Our very existence in these systems becomes just a means to a physical end. Produce, consume, repeat, often losing sight of our intrinsic worth, our higher potential.
Okay, now here's where that Copernican idea really kicks in, and it gets fascinating. The core idea, the big proposition, is this radical flip. Value is not an inherent property of objects. It's not in the gold bar, not in the bushel of wheat, not in the factory itself. Instead, value is assigned by the human mind. It's in our perception, our meaning-making, our agreement about something's worth, a total inversion.
Precisely. The fundamental starting point, the presupposition of what they call a mind-based economy, is that the human experience is fully captured by our ability to change reality, both physical and mental reality, through our conscious actions. We are, at our core, things that generate meaning. So the human experience is really about the mental actions that create value, the ingenuity, the care, the insight, the problem solving. It's not fundamentally about any specific arrangement of matter that we then make claims on. Physical arrangements, whether it's complex astronomical data, a beautiful painting, a well-designed building, even just a nail hammered skillfully into a wall, that should only be used as pointers to value. They're manifestations, evidence of the mind's work, but not the source of the value itself. The real value lies in the mental effort, the conceptualization, the observation, the skilled action, not just the physical thing produced.
That's such a different way of looking at it. It needs that goose and golden egg analogy you mentioned.
Right. Our sources use that fable perfectly. Traditional economics is obsessed with the golden egg, the physical product, the material wealth. It measures it, trades it, hoards the eggs, but this new model flips the focus entirely to the source of the value. the conscious, creative goose, the human mind. Value gets allocated to the human act of changing matter, the ingenuity, the care, the thought process, not just the physical product that pops out at the end. It's about celebrating the generator, not just the generated output.
Focusing on the mind.
Exactly. And furthermore, they argue that our current tech, combined with the immense pressures on finite resources, actually require us to shift to an economy based on knowledge, based on the mind, not on just consuming more physical stuff endlessly. It seems pretty clear that the product of the mind, innovation, efficiency, new ways of thinking, is the only truly sustainable path forward if both humans and nature are going to thrive. If we keep focusing only on physical resources as the source of value, it just forces more and more uncontrolled consumption, leads towards ecological disaster, continued scarcity. But if the focus shifts to the value of the human mind itself, then the only logical priority becomes preserving life, fostering self-actualization for everyone, because every single mind holds potential value. This mind-based approach also means replacing the traditional market driven by supply, demand, scarcity with something more fundamental, more compassionate maybe. See a need, fill a need, driven purely by human will, ingenuity, and a collective desire for well-being.
Okay, but this idea that value is only in the mind, that physical things have no inherent value, that feels like a huge hurdle. Our whole society seems built on the opposite idea.
It is a huge hurdle. Our sources call it a psychosis, this collective, deeply ingrained belief that value is physical, that things themselves are inherently valuable. This psychosis, they argue, is as fundamentally mistaken, as much an illusion, as the geocentric view was before Copernicus. Just like people genuinely believe the sun went around the earth, we collectively believe money, gold, land hold intrinsic value. Our sources challenge that. They maintain value as purely a product of mind, a consensus of consciousness. Value doesn't revolve around an object, it revolves around a mind. And even if you take a materialist view of the mind itself, just seeing it as a physical state, the distinction they're making is still crucial. The difference between external material objects and internal mental constructs is enough to grasp what a mind-based economy means. It's a profound shift in focus.
So if the mind is the source, what does that do for innovation?
Well, if the mind is truly the focus of value judgments, then the potential for new innovations, for solving complex problems, for human flourishing, it seems genuinely unlimited. That's a stark contrast to our current system, isn't it? Where money, by design, has to be kept scarce to stop inflation. And that need for scarcity often means innovation gets choked off if it's not immediately profitable, regardless of human need or potential. But this mind-piece system, it removes that artificial scarcity constraint. It provides exactly what's needed to tackle the huge challenges we face, physical and mental. It just opens up a universe of possibilities.
That's a massive leak, as you say. It feels philosophical first, then economic. But it brings up a really basic fundamental question. If money isn't the currency anymore, if we're not trading dollars or gold bars or bitcoins, what actually facilitates exchange? What is the currency in this mind-based economy?
The new currency, according to this model, is quite simply, elegantly perhaps, recognition. Value gets replaced by an individual's value rating. And that rating is based on their conscious actions, the actions of their mind, their contributions, insights, care, effort. Society then has this sort of natural obligation to define what constitutes value and to justly allocate a value rating for each human's interaction with the world. And this recognition, importantly, it can't be issued by banks or some central authority because, as they put it, all human interactions generate recognition. It's meant to be this continuous dynamic process, an organic feedback loop of mutual appreciation, societal benefit. Imagine your contributions, intellectual or empathetic, being directly acknowledged and accounted for.
So my value comes from what I contribute, mentally, creatively, and how others recognize that.
Exactly. And this directly tackles that problem of alienation we talked about earlier. By celebrating mental effort, creative sparks, depth of care, by valuing that, this model can potentially heal the alienation that's so common in materialist systems. Individuals get recognized for contributions far beyond just factory work or producing commodities. An artist isn't just selling canvas and paint. They're recognized for the unique vision, the skill they bring forth. A caregiver isn't just doing a job. They're recognized for empathy, patience, dedication. It fosters a culture where self-expression, innovation, compassionate interaction are really fundamental. It's about the unique value you bring through thoughts, creativity, care, effort, and that value is seen and affirmed.
And this sounds much more inclusive, too.
Immensely so. It fosters profound inclusivity and recognizes universal creative potential. It aims to equally value the unique capabilities of every human being. It eliminates that traditional hierarchy that often privileges physical strength or just material output. So this provides a framework where people who might be marginalized in a purely materialist system may be disabled people. Non-traditional contributors are fully recognized for their mental emotional input. It acknowledges, for instance, that the mental resources, the compassion, the care needed to support disabled or elderly people fully, they already exist in abundance. It's just capitalism's weakness, its narrow focus on quantifiable output, that stops that care from being properly realized and valued within its framework.
What about bigger structures, like the state? How does that change?
Even the state, as we know it, transforms in this view. It becomes less about territory, more about what our sources call moral alliances of like-minded people. Groups defined by shared language, culture, faith, laws, values. And the really radical idea here is that these groups could potentially coexist, collaborate, without needing rigid physical borders, defined by shared values, not lines on a map. Access to goods and services, then, isn't just about how much money you have or where you live. It becomes more like a social contract, based on your contribution to society, local or global, and what kind of access that contribution warrants, based on contribution and recognition.
What about things like greed? Does that just disappear?
Probably not disappear entirely, humans being human, but the argument is that greed would have a much harder time taking root and flourishing, because it wouldn't be institutionally protected anymore by systems that reward hoarding physical wealth above all else. The incentive shifts, you see, from hoarding to contributing, from owning stuff to generating meaning. And it's really important to clarify, this is absolutely not socialism. The sources are very clear on this. This system values only individual contributions. There's no shared ownership of means of production, none of that traditional socialist theory. Instead, communities, companies, they distribute value based on the specific unique contributions of the individual minds within them. And the law's role shifts to protecting human dignity by judging conflicting claims on value, ensuring fairness in this recognition system.
And technology plays a role in making this practical.
A crucial role. Modern information tech, AI, blockchain, things like that, they can become the new accountants for this mind-based system. Imagine sophisticated systems tracking contributions and recognition fairly, transparently, verifying value perceptions, mapping the complex links between human activities and the physical world. The goal is to use our collective knowledge about human behavior and the mind to create a transparent, verifiable system that justly allocates recognition, ensuring a fair and dynamic flow of value.
So this isn't just a pie-in-the-sky idea. It's presented as logically sound, even compatible with where technology is taking us anyway. A natural step, maybe, from a consumer economy to a true knowledge economy.
Exactly. And just to reiterate, this is a profound break from any kind of materialist assessment of value, including Marxist ideas that also tied value to physical labor. Instead, it aligns perfectly with a modern post-materialist view, where value isn't in inert objects, but in consciousness itself, in the human mind, and in the agreed-upon interactions between humans. It's a complete flip of how we understand wealth and progress. Human flourishing becomes the yardstick, not just stacking up more stuff.
Okay, if we connect this back to the bigger picture, this mind-based economy vision, it points towards an abundance of creativity, right?
Yeah.
Human ingenuity unleashed. But what about the material world? Especially something as basic and, let's face it, contentious as energy. That still feels incredibly scarce, tied up in geopolitics, environmental crises. How do we power billions of flourishing minds? How does that piece fit into this new millennium synthesis?
That's precisely where the next really radical proposal from our sources slots in. And it's vital for moving beyond those 19th century constraints. You know, a lot of science fiction, as our sources point out, often shows these futures stuck in a kind of nightmare vision. Rich versus poor, powerful versus weak, a perpetual struggle. And that's because, they argue, those stories are often trapped in that old 19th century thinking. Our minds get stuck on this utopia versus apocalypse track. It overlooks the potential for what our sources call an ecosystem of abundant species of human communities, where conscious cooperation, mutual care could actually redefine progress, allowing lots of different ways to flourish, not just one imposed ideal.
Okay, so how do we get the energy for that flourishing?
The core assumption here is strikingly simple but profound. In the nuclear energy age, which we are undeniably in, there's simply no morally defensible argument for limiting access to energy for human progress. Full stop. We're talking about the absolute necessity of an extreme increase in overall energy availability, not just to meet current needs, but for the huge climate goals, the developmental goals facing humanity. Put simply, If we don't dramatically boost energy availability and decouple it from old economic models, we just won't hit our climate targets. We won't lift billions out of poverty. We won't enable that widespread flourishing.
That immediately raises a huge question, though. How do we get that radical abundance without just creating new problems or letting the same old power dynamics take over the energy supply? The answer from the sources sounds almost impossible. Completely isolate all the supply of heat and electrical energy from all other human activities. How could that possibly work?
It is a bold stroke, absolutely. The core concept is called the ISCOT. That stands for the Independent Energy Supply Community of Trust. Imagine a globally networked community, trusted enterprises, with one single, unwavering purpose: supply abundant, clean, baseload heat and electrical energy to the entire planet. And here's the revolutionary part. It would be completely isolated from the world's normal economic and political activities.
Isolated?
Yes.
How energy is so tied into everything.
By making energy a proto-commodity, a unique status. By mutual agreement, it's not treated like a normal commodity. You don't value it in monetary terms, you don't buy it, you don't pay for it like other goods. It would simply be supplied without cost to any human enterprise, any community, any individual who needs it. No exceptions, no discrimination. This radical divorce of energy from economics and politics is designed specifically to stop it from ever being weaponized, hoarded, or used as a political lever, fundamentally changing it from a scarce resource fought over to an abundant utility freely available.
Okay, but practically, how would that operate? Where does it come from?
Operationally, the idea is it would have a very small physical footprint. Think highly efficient, very secure, contained facilities, operated discreetly, mostly out of sight. This community, the ISCOT, would have complete ownership and responsibility for its operations and its externalities. Any pollution, any waste, fully contained. Its only job is to supply the energy. Getting it from the supply point to homes, factories, the distribution that stays part of normal economic activity, local infrastructure. And there'd be a continuous dedicated effort in research and exploration, pushing energy science forward, ensuring long-term safety, viability, improving supply constantly. A critical principle is fungibility. The energy supply has to be completely independent and fungible, meaning, as they say, no unwarranted moral or political strings attached, just like we expect money to be freely exchangeable.
And why isolate it? What problem does that solve?
It directly addresses the chronic failures of our current system. Capital investment-linked energy solutions often fall short. They get bogged down in economic deadlocks, political fights, the profit motive overriding public good. By isolating the supply from all that conflict, the ISCOT aims to just bypass those limitations and provide a stable, abundant energy foundation for everything else humanity wants to do.
Okay, and the energy source itself. You mentioned nuclear.
Yes. Our sources argue that nuclear fission is currently the best bet for baseload power, with fusion hopefully coming down the line. Why? Because nuclear fission uses the smallest physical volume of resources known to generate vast amounts of energy. That small resource footprint is absolutely critical for the ISCOT's independence. It allows for unobtrusive, contained, supremely manageable infrastructure, incredible energy density from minimal stuff. Furthermore, putting nuclear energy enterprises inside this isolated ISCOT structure helps contain the safety and control challenges. Instead of hoping all 7 billion humans suddenly achieve perfect moral fidelity to manage nuclear power safely, maybe unrealistic, you isolate these sensitive activities, put them in a rigorously vetted community of trust, independent but completely open for review by anyone. There's even the potential to use legacy nuclear material from dismantled weapons, turning a huge threat into a vital resource, literally swords into plowshares.
So let's imagine this happens, a mind-based economy, free, abundant energy via this ISCOT. What does that actually mean for society day to day? The implications feel...
They are potentially vast, transformative. Although our sources are realistic, they expect, initially anyway, significant resistance, maybe outright rejection from parts of society. They suggest this kind of really deep, paradigm-shifting idea often only gets accepted under extreme duress and real existential fear of destruction. Think about the UN emerging after World War II, or universal human rights only really taking hold after we saw the horrors people were capable of. It implies a crisis might be needed as the catalyst.
A sobering thought. But assuming we get past that initial resistance,
the upside is immense. With abundant, cost-free energy flowing from the ISCOT, societies can redirect their focus, their collective human energy, towards the real human and environmental challenges. Things that were just too expensive or seemed impossible before. We're talking monumental tasks. Large-scale environmental cleanup, maybe terraforming deserts, serious space exploration, colonization. This scenario, they argue, creates immeasurable large-scale economic opportunities, exponential growth of new job creation. Because that massive crippling obstacle, the cost of energy, is just removed from the equation. It allows for realizing good living for everyone, however they define it. It enables solutions to our biggest problems, greenhouse gases, resource depletion, by allowing us to think bigger, maybe even replace earthbound resources with space-based ones eventually. It truly lets humanity dream on a different scale.
So daily life, it changes, but maybe not in the ways we first think.
In many ways, life could go on as normal, but just profoundly better. Only the vested energy interests, those profiting from scarcity, get disconnected from their old power base. All the other human stuff, interests, conflicts, they probably remain. But hopefully, interactions become more dynamic, more based on morality and collective learning, freed from that energy scarcity mindset. If someone seems to be misusing energy, for example, that gets resolved between communities through dialogue, agreement, not by the ISIC shutting off the tap, it stays neutral, just providing the energy. And the ISIC explicitly aims to systematically displace fossil fuels as an energy source, treating them like a cancer to be eradicated from the energy supply. But fossil minerals, the carbon itself, can then be used constructively for advanced materials, things like that, instead of just being burned, turning a problem into a resource.
What's the incentive for people working in the ISCIP then, if energy is free?
The reward for the ISCAT itself, for its members, is simple but profound: humanity's progress. Contributors would get an equitable claim on wealth back in the real economy, maybe new forms of money, crypto, whatever evolves. But it would be fundamentally inflation neutral because the free energy itself provides such a massive intrinsic universal benefit. Their compensation is tied directly to enabling human flourishing. And one last interesting point. This idea suggests that nature's own energy systems, solar, wind, hydro, should maybe be left dedicated to nature's purposes, maintaining ecological balance within natural habitats. Human aspirations, human progress should instead be powered by this newly created energy from the ISCAT for new human activities, completely decoupling our progress from disrupting the natural world's energy balance, a separation of human needs from ecological exploitation.
Okay, this brings us right back to the central puzzle, the core question of this deep dive. We've explored these incredible scientific insights, dismantling 19th century materialism. We've dug into these radical, but seemingly feasible, proposals for economic value based on mind and energy as an abundant free right. So, if this new millennium synthesis is so compelling, if the knowledge and the means are, as you say, literally within reach, why does it seem so stuck? Why aren't we seeing this take off? Why the stasis?
That really is the core problem, isn't it? And our sources suggest it boils down to something deep within us, a profound unwillingness to get rid of 19th century models. Despite all the tech advances, despite the logical arguments, despite the clear path to abundance shown, humanity seems collectively trapped by old assumptions. It's not really a lack of information. It feels more like a deep-seated resistance to letting go of the familiar, even if it's not working well.
And that psychosis idea comes back here.
Absolutely. That persistent psychosis, as they call it, this shared illusion, this societal blind spot, that value is inherently physical. Despite the logic saying value originates in the mind, we cling to the idea that physical things just are valuable. It's as fundamentally mistaken, they argue, as believing the Earth was the center of the universe. We're like a patient stuck on an old, wrong diagnosis, even when a new, better curative one is right there. Just because we're comfortable with the old label, it's not just an intellectual mistake, it's a deep psychological attachment to a flawed view of reality.
And money is a big part of that attachment.
A huge part. The money monster, as they term it. We seem unable to abandon money as this scarce resource tied only to physical claims, even when crisis after crisis shows how inadequate it is as a true mind-based value system. Money, in its current form, has proven itself incapable of being a mind-based value system, yet we cling to it. It dictates so much, limits potential, fuels conflict, even though it's just a symbol representing something we fundamentally misunderstand. This attachment to a system that demonstrably fails us is a primary reason for this materialistic stasis.
Beyond money, what else keeps us stuck?
There's also a powerful ideological fixation. Our minds, our stories, our political narratives, they often get stuck on this dualist utopia versus apocalypse theme, perpetuated by these mechanistic superiority narratives, the idea that conflict, competition, dominance are just inevitable, the only way things work. And this fixation prevents us from really seeing or embracing the alternative, that relationship ecosystem of cooperative communities these new models envision. Instead of seeing a dynamic web of collaboration, mutual aid, we're stuck on old scripts of control, winners and losers, zero-sum games. We find it hard to imagine a path that isn't either perfect heaven or total hell.
It's like we lack the imagination for a different kind of progress.
That could be part of it. And perhaps the most sobering point our sources make is that these kinds of radical fundamental shifts often only happen under extreme duress and real existential fear of destruction. It implies humanity might just be waiting for a truly global, undeniable crisis, maybe something really apocalyptic, before we finally embrace this synthesis. Think about human rights after WWII, or climate action only gaining traction when the impacts became impossible to ignore. It shows how deeply embedded these old 19th century frameworks are in our collective psyche, how much pain it sometimes takes to shake them loose. We seem to need that powerful negative feedback to break free from comfortable but ultimately limiting illusions.
So it's not just abstract ideas holding us back.
Not at all. Beyond these conceptual barriers, you have very real practical resistances. Think about the vast networks of vested interests that benefit directly from the old models. Energy corporations, sure, but also financial institutions, established political structures, even educational systems designed to reinforce the status quo. These aren't just ideas, they're powerful, tangible entities with huge resources, and they will actively resist changes that threaten their power and profit.
And our own psychology plays a role too.
Definitely. We all have cognitive biases. Confirmation bias, we look for proof we're already right. Status quo bias, we prefer things stay the same. Loss aversion, we fear losing what we have more than we desire potential gains. These biases make it incredibly hard for individuals and whole societies to embrace radical change even when it's logical and beneficial. The fear of the unknown, fear of dismantling what we know, even if flawed, is a powerful break.
Plus, these ideas are, well, they're big.
Yeah.
Complex.
Exactly. The sheer complexity and perceived overwhelm can be a barrier, too. While the logic might be sound, these ideas demand a complete rethink of everything: value, governance, energy. Without a clear, step-by-step roadmap or some unifying force leading the charge, these transformative concepts can just feel too vast, too daunting to ever take root in the messy reality of human affairs. It's not just resistance, it's also the sheer challenge of coordinating such a massive shift globally.
What's truly fascinating, though, and maybe empowering in a way, is that the knowledge, the tech, the actual means to achieve this new synthesis, they seem to be genuinely within our grasp. It's not a lack of capability, not a lack of understanding. Fundamentally, it feels like a challenge of perception, of collective will, of letting go of old paradigms and allowing ourselves to actually see and then build a new reality.
Yeah.
It's a mental leap that has to come before the physical one.
Exactly. And it's crucial to get this. The proposed system isn't some fantasy divorce from reality. It grows directly out of the successes of the Enlightenment celebrating reason, science. It relies on our basic belief that reality can be understood, that progress is possible. The core message from these sources is pretty clear. Modern technology can supply basic human dignity to everyone. Food, shelter, energy, the chance to flourish, simply based on the idea that being human is intrinsically valuable. But, and this is the huge caveat, only if we collectively manage to overcome our enslavement to those old models of capitalism and materialism. It's about recognizing that universal well-being isn't a pipe dream. It's a choice. It's within our technological reach, just waiting for us to shed those outdated mental shackles.
We've covered a lot of ground today, journeyed from that bedrock of 19th century materialism through the scientific earthquakes of the 20th century that shattered those foundations, and into this bold, interconnected vision for a post-materialist future. A future where value comes from consciousness, where human flourishing is the goal, and where energy is an abundant, cost-free right for everyone. It's a future that seems technologically possible, logically sound, maybe even morally imperative, yet it seems stubbornly stalled by our own assumptions, the echoes of those outdated models.
Indeed. And it really leaves us, and you, the listener, with a truly provocative thought to chew on. If value genuinely is a product of the human mind, and if the resources and the tech for universal well-being are, as our sources compellingly argue, already within our reach, what immense, breathtaking possibilities finally open up for humanity when we collectively choose to ditch that old, distorting mirror of materialist economics. When we embrace this completely new reflection, what will you do as an individual, as a creative, conscious being, when recognition becomes the ultimate currency and human potential, not just physical stuff, truly defines our progress?
A truly deep dive indeed, leaving us with a lot to consider, a lot to question, and maybe, definitely, a lot to imagine. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep deep diving into the insights that shape our world.